My name is Ann Thrupp, and I'm the Executive Director of the Berkeley Food Institute. And thank you all for coming today. We have two really exciting panels ahead, and we're really happy to have everybody join us. For those of you who are familiar with the Berkeley Food Institute, then you'll know this, but our mission is to catalyze and support transformative change in food systems to promote diversity, justice, resilience, and health. So the topic of the forum today is clearly very much aligned with our basic mission. And through our programs, we're building to create more connections between research and education and with policy and practitioners. So that's part of the idea of having these forums is to get diverse perspectives from all those different aspects or sectors. So before I give a short introduction, I'd like to find out if you could raise your hands. Who's here today, just briefly? Do we have some students? Raise your hand. Okay, how about faculty members? A few. How about community members? That would include nonprofit organizations. Are there any farmers? A few farmers, great. And I'm sure more will be joining us, but yeah, we have often a diversity of people that come to this. And I want to just start off by asking the question of why are we addressing this topic today in this forum? Obviously, the drought in California is crucial and is incredibly unprecedented and severe historically. And we've brought together some key people to talk about this, to offer some insights. Now, we know that this could be a day-long, if not a week-long or many weeks-long discussion with many, many people. And there are no easy answers, no easy solutions, great complexities, but at least we're providing some really leaders who are thinking about this and taking action on this issue from the grassroots and from academia and from practitioners in farming and in communities. So hopefully this will provide some insight into these issues and help us lead to some ideas concerning policies and practices that are needed. So beyond the specifics of the crisis of the drought, we're really interested in exploring this not only as a crisis response, but our intention is to give attention to the ways to foster resilience and health as really critical dimensions of our food systems. And I want to really briefly mention the definitions we're using for those terms because they are complex terms. But when we talk about resilience, it refers to the capability of food production systems and of people dependent on those food systems to respond effectively to changes in the environment and in socioeconomic conditions as well. So it's the capacity of food systems to recover to stresses, but also to ensure sustainability and equity and well-being over the long run. And that's not always the way that people define that, but we're really defining the term quite holistically to incorporate social and environmental dimensions. Does that make sense? Okay, and similarly with health, that we talk about health, often we consider our human health, our own wellness and well-being. But we're talking about wellness of people in all aspects of the food systems through access to sufficient and nutritious food, the absence of disease or ill health associated with the lack of inappropriate foods or inadequate working conditions, and also the health of ecosystems, that is soil and plants and animals and natural resources. So I know we're going to have a rich discussion of this, but we did want to put that up front just to kind of clarify what are we meaning by these terms. And but more importantly, our speakers are going to be reflecting upon their experiences with these issues and how they're bringing about change. So with that, I would like to introduce our moderator for the first panel, and he in turn will introduce the speakers, and we'll have lots of opportunity for interaction with all of you in the discussion. So Craig McNamara, we're very honored to have Craig today, and he's the president and owner of Sierra Orchards, a diversified farming operation producing primarily organic walnuts. By connecting people, policy, and agricultural best practices, Craig works to protect the land that feeds us and to promote social justice and support the next generation of farmers. He also serves as the founder of the Center for Land-Based Learning, a program that helps high school students build greater social and human capital in their communities. And Craig is president of the California State Board on Food and Agriculture. He has many other honored positions and awards, including the California Agriculturalist of the Year in 2014, and the James Irving Leadership Award, the Leopold Conservation Award, among many other honored positions. He's also been very involved in the governor's discussions and discussions with many people in the community about this issue of drought, resilience, and health and food systems. So with that, let's welcome Craig, and thank you, Craig, and all the speakers for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's wonderful to be here with you this afternoon, and welcome, and thank you for being here to join us in this great conversation with an outstanding group of farmers and panelists. And you have their bios in front of you, but I always enjoy knowing a little bit about somebody that may not be in their bio. So I called each panelist and said, tell me a little bit about where you grew up, what you're thinking, a little bit about your family, and maybe what your future of California looks like. So Renata, you're first up on my list. And she grew up in a small town in Ontario called Acton. And it was known for both its leather tanning and hops growing, which I thought was great. Did you know that your town was the leading tanning town in all of Canada?
Yeah, yep. And the motto of the town was, it's worth the drive to Acton, of the tannery, that is.
So in 1989, you worked with an NGO and spent a great deal of time in Brazil, in Argentina, and Chile, and Peru, looking at transitions to democracy. And then in 90, you and your family came to California. And you have a daughter, Lucy, and live in Occidental. And when I said, what's your hope and your dream for California? It is that it be well positioned on the important issues of climate change and agriculture, and that it both learn from and be an influential leader in addressing these critical issues around the world. And that's what we're here to talk about. John. So when I talked to John, I already knew where John was from, but he told me he was born in Five Points in the Central Valley. Anybody been down? Okay, that's where we got to be these days, because that's where things are really happening. John studied in the seminary for 6 years and eventually graduated from UCD with a degree in agricultural economics. His mother was of Italian descent, and I think you told me she really knew how to milk cows.
He did.
Okay, and that his father was born in New Jersey, and at the age of 6 months, the family moved to Los Angeles because of bad air.
Bad air. Yeah.
A lot of coal
in
the early 1900s. Little did they know what was ahead of them.
That's it.
And going back to John's time in the seminary, when I asked him what his hopes and the dreams were, he said, well, if he were God for a day, he would reorder the water resources of California into a reliable, equitable, and clean source of water for all Californians. I think it's going to take a godlike figure to do that, but I might as well work on it. Jeff grew up in a little town. We've got a lot of little towns represented here, of Eastern, in the high country of Michigan. I too I grew up in Michigan for a while. And his childhood was filled with hunting and fishing memories. His family moved to Southern California because his dad was an early adapter in the computer business, computer engineer. And this gentleman served in the Peace Corps in Botswana for 3 years. He was on a course to become a lawyer, and I think that totally turned him around into an agriculturalist. And you and your wife live in Kingsburg, 2 daughters. And your response, Jeff's hopes and dreams, is that the phenomenal productive capacity of our state and our people will thrive in the long term. So isn't that why we're here? I mean, each person independently, they didn't know I was going to ask these questions. That really is why we're here at such a critical time. I've been farming for 40 years, and I've never seen a crisis like the one we're facing. And yet, wherever you go, you see wise people like all of you in the audience. I see you at various meetings and places, and I realize through this creative energy, we're going to tackle this. And tomorrow won't be the same as today. And there's many things that we personally have to do to confront this crisis that we're facing. And it is a tremendous crisis. One of the things that we're facing is some misinformation. And we may pick this apart a little later on. But you know that factoid that 80% of California's water is used by agriculture? It's not true. And I hope you've seen it in the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the New York Times, and other magazines. It's just not true. If you look at the water that Mother Nature gives us in a snowpack, in rainfall, Colorado River, 41% of that water is used by agriculture to produce food that's used across California, the nation, and the world. 10% is used for human and urban use, and the balance, 50, is used for our environment, for our rivers, and outflow to the oceans. PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California, has done a remarkable job. They are a great player in bringing us facts about water and California. The other thing, almonds have become the poster child for poor water use, a gallon to produce a nut. Well, let me tell you what some of the other crops require. By the way, before I do that, I just want to drill down on snowpack for a second. Did you guys see that last week snowpack was 6% of historic? If you look at historic being the last 30 years of the last century, and you jump to the last 30 years of this century, if climate change increases our temperature by 3 to 5 degrees, we'll have 60% less snowpack at the end of the century. If our temperature increases from 5 to 8 degrees, our snowpack will be 80% less than history. So we have a big problem in retaining water and having that for us. Today, what that 6% of snowpack means that 42% of California's irrigated farmland will have its water cut by 80% or more. 42% of California's ag land will be cut by 80%. We will be fallowing 620,000 acres. We fallowed 400,000 acres last year. We will lose 23,000 jobs. We lost 17,000. We'll lose $6 billion. We lost $2 billion. That's the difference from last year to this year. So we have a problem on our hands. And then we've got this discussion about ag and its use of water. Well, it takes 35 gallons to produce a head of broccoli. It takes 50 gallons to produce 1 cantaloupe. It takes 168 gallons to produce that nice green, pink watermelon. It takes 2,113 gallons of water to produce my shoes. And you know what? That latte that we enjoyed this morning, 53 gallons of water for that latte. 8.5 gallons of water for your microchip, and I got a few of them right here. So we are one state. We are going to move forward together, but we've got problems, and we can't pick apart each other. Yes, let's be critical. Let's drill down on what we need to do as the future. But remember, we got to do it together. We're not North and South. We're not eaters and enviros against ag or against fish. We really have to do that. So that's what we're here to do. Renata just came off of an amazing opportunity at UC Davis. She, with CalCAN, put on a summit for climate and agriculture 10 days ago. Two-day summit. The first day was touring. The second day, remarkable workshops. Some of you were present. Renata, you're up. We've asked each presenter to give us 5 or 7 minutes, framing this idea of resilience and health in the food systems in California.
Great. Thank you, Craig.
I'm going to be a strict timekeeper.
Good. That was a really helpful introduction. I've been thinking a lot about in fact, I was just talking on the way over here about how unhelpful it is to war, the war of words. So I appreciate you opening up that way. So we were asked a couple things. One is, what are some ways to increase resilience in farming systems? And I'm particularly interested to hear these two guys, because I don't consider myself an expert in answering that question, but I listen to these kind of folks a lot. So what I picked up in my answer to that is sort of some guiding characteristics that I just wanted to offer. One is that we, in any problem we're facing that's as complex as climate change or sustainable agriculture, we have to look for solutions that solve many problems at once. Going after single problems with single silver bullet solutions, I don't think is going to get us where we need to get. And a test for me of any idea somebody throws out is whether it does that, whether it solves multiple problems. That's a Wendell Berryism, if you've read any of his stuff, his theory of solving for pattern. I think we have to look for local wisdom, because the answers aren't going to be the same in 5 Points as they are up in Sonoma County where I live, or Paso Robles or whatever. I think we have to plan for extremes, clearly. We have to plan for the unplannable, the unexpected, and the variable. And I would argue that in addition to looking to technology to provide solutions, I think we could use a greater emphasis on biological solutions, solutions that are knowledge-based, that are integrated and biological in nature, to complement those. We're very fond as human beings of building things and thinking we can control things, but I think more and more we have to look to nature's wisdom. Biomimicry is a phrase you hear sometimes, or just looking for solutions in the soil, for example, and what's going to be good for soil could be for a good guiding indicator for what's going to make a farm more resilient. So I'm just going to give you one quick example, if I have time, about that. And actually, I think we're going to hear from John about some of his technological ideas, and I'm not suggesting that we don't do them. I'm just suggesting we also do some other biological solutions, which he also does. I hope he gets to tell you about the integration of all these solutions he's working on. So let's say we want to increase or deal with the drought. We want to improve water conservation on farms. And again, this isn't going to be every farm everywhere, but there's been a lot of money and resources and know-how invested in improving irrigation efficiency and in improving the efficiency of how we move pump water around the state through the water projects. All important, but we're going to hit a limit with that. There is going to be a limit in the technological capabilities of those systems. So while we're doing that, I think we have to get far better at improving soil health, for example. So what we get, and so to go back to my checklist, what we get if we don't just focus on more efficient irrigation, but also look at soil health, what we'll get if we pay attention to soil health is we'll necessarily be increasing the organic matter in that soil through the use of compost, of cover crops, of manure additions, organic inputs. What we'll get when we do that is reduced reliance and use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, which have a tremendously high burden in terms of energy that's required to produce it, and therefore greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with those fertilizers. We should get some economic savings for growers because we'll be retaining water in the soils. The soils will start to serve as a reservoir of water, and they'll therefore have to import less water or drill fewer or less deep wells. We'll be able to cycle organic so-called waste products back into the biological systems they came from, rather than going into landfills where they are a problem, where they produce methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. And that'll create a demand for more compost and more manure on farms, which is a policy that's mandated increasingly by California legislature. And finally, if we use cover crops, for example, for fertility, they can sometimes provide pollinator services. So that's, that sort of hopefully gives you an idea of the constellation of benefits that are possible if we not only pay attention to technology, but also to living systems.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
John, please.
Okay. I'm farm in Westlands Water District in western Fresno County. I was asked to talk about our irrigation practices and relationship to the drought and some of the things that we've done. And currently our region, not just my farm, either you use drip irrigation, and we've become very efficient in how we put that into the soil, take it out of the soil, recycle it, all of that. We're very keen on irrigation management programs. We work with CMIS, which is the university system coordinated through the DWR on irrigation management practices for people in agriculture. In addition to that, we have pivots that we use for land that is probably not going to be farmed all the time. There will be times in California when we do have water. We have to have the ability to be flexible in what we do. We have taken our farm from around 30 employees down to about 5, and as a consequence of the fact that we have not had any water allocations in the last few years. We do know that how much water we have as a recharge amount for our region, and so we try to farm the water wells that we have to that number. And basically, we've been running those wells in replacement of since 1930. And so in a long-term perspective of trying to get long-term sustainability, what we've done is reduce the number of acres we actually do farm. From an econ perspective, we've had to choose crops that generate more revenue per acre and taken crops that don't. And in our rotation, we farm probably 10 to 15 different kinds of crops at one time or another on the land. We do grow things because of their what we would consider soil health. I've been working with Jeff Mitchell here in the University of California and the field station next to us for over 30 years, and we have, incorporated various practices for the crops we grow. A lot of them are growing not because they're so wildly profitable, but because of what they actually do to the biology of the soil. And we obviously need to make some money on them. I mean, it's not like we're trying to just do it totally on a charitable process, right? So the techniques and the strategy are around incorporating the health of the soil. And I was asked what is your definition of that? And I said, what we need some help from the university with is the biological component of that. I said CEC is fine. We can kind of get an idea of what our organic matter is in the soil, but we, up to this point in time, as farmers, as a general rule, have only been able to take the mineral or the chemistry of the soil and know what that is over time. And so we do manage salinity within that system with our water and our what we do have and when we do grow things, because we know certain crops are more sensitive than others. So between the drip irrigation, the pivots, and water management, we do not do any flood irrigation in our particular situation, because for every acre foot of water that we have, we can generate more revenue and to not be totally efficient with that. And our strategy is to create the leaching fraction in years when we have higher amounts of water, which will happen, as it always does in California. The other side of this is that I've been engaged in a long-term program with the California Department of Water Resources, the NRCS, and Bureau of Reclamation to some extent on recycling the groundwater that we have. We have a perched water table on a portion of our ranch and taking that water and using it as a resource. So as we all know, not only our farmers, but all of us are resource managers, whether that's at your house and how you handle water in your own sink. It is a resource that is available to all, and that all need to be engaged in how that resource is managed. And so wasting water at any level is not really in the cards for California if we're going to go anywhere. So the reality is that if you take the water that would be considered unpotable or water that has salinity levels that are above what normally would be acceptable for farming, then we have the ability to do that, and we are doing that currently. We are engaged with some folks from down at UCLA who have a project at the Pinoche Drainage District that we are part of because of what we've done on my ranch, and it's at a larger scale, and they're taking and recycling that water and also creating good potable water from that. And part of it is newer technology for the reverse osmosis program. We can go into that more later, and how we are working towards the harvesting of the salts from the system, which is another resource management issue rather than a waste product issue. So I'll leave it at that for right now.
Thank you, John. That really sets us up for a discussion in a second after Jeff.
Thanks, Craig, very much. And thanks, Ann Thrupp and the Berkeley Food Institute and some of the other behind-the-scenes encouragers who allowed me to be part of this fabulous discussion this afternoon. The issues are clearly very important and very demanding right now. And I think I agree with Renata. They're only going to be solved by very long-term strategic planning and very multifaceted, coordinated innovation and a variety of different practices that are going to be need to be brought to bear in the future here. The sustainability of groundwater use is not sustainable. Water is overpromised in a lot of sectors. The need for storage, whatever kinds of storage is going to be imagined, groundwater storage is going to need to be increased, and clearly more innovation in terms of increasing water use efficiency and the innovation related to conservation are all going to be needed, I think. I've had great fortune in my own career, both back as a student working back in the 1980s when some of the saline drainage water issues were raising their heads and surfacing in the San Joaquin Valley. Some of the innovation that's gone on to managing that water resource that John just talked about, the phenomenal increases of very water use efficient irrigation technologies that have been brought to bear on this are but part of the solution that's going to come to be needed even broader scale right now. There are certain sectors where there are opportunities to introduce those technologies that for greater adoption that can be addressed as well. The need for within the agricultural sector for improved technologies, irrigation systems innovation that John talked about, the scheduling of irrigation based on sensors and ET, those kinds of technologies are going to be increasingly important. But beyond all of these kinds of opportunities and tools, if you will, there are other systems-based opportunities that haven't been realized yet. And I'd like to share briefly a little bit about what those could be. What would they look like? Well, imagine, and Renata touched at this a little bit earlier, systems that mimic natural systems, that reduce disturbance of the soil, for instance, that preserve residues over the surface of the soil, and that deliberately build both diversity, not only in the rotation of species across the time frame, but also that build diversity in the soil as well. These systems also might have even increased controlled traffic associated with them so that the trafficking across the soil by implements or tractors could be reduced and would be. They've been used in many regions around the world that have been faced severe issues of water shortage and drought. The Dakotas, the Great Plains of the United States, Canada, Australia, the systems have been brought to bear. Our own research over in the Central Valley has shown that the coupling of these practices, reduced disturbance, residues, improving the various water holding capacities, storage, intake of the soil, can have benefits of reducing the amount of soil water evaporation that goes on to about 16%, a total of 4 or 5 inches on an annual summer crop, ET demand of a summer crop. It's estimated that just recently in 2012, the coupling of these approaches that in the state of South Dakota has amounted to about $1.1 billion of water-related savings to the productive capacity of that region. But they're not used currently right now. John Diener himself, I don't know if you remember this, but back in 2003, he reported to me that he was able to go without 2 irrigations on one of his winter wheat crops just by the use of these no-till approaches here. So I'll reinforce 3 points here to wrap this up. The immense challenges that we're facing with the water shortage and the drought right now are only going to be solved by multifaceted, long-term strategic planning. That there are some practices that currently aren't being used, I think, at any widespread form of adoption in California. Some of these techniques that are generally known as conservation agriculture are being used by folks in many regions here. And there are farmers who are able to take advantage of these kinds of things. There are folks, again, in the Dakotas who are currently talking about growing vegetables with these kinds of approaches and selling them to the closer Chicago markets there. With that, my own mentor is a guy in South Dakota State University who talks about the ability of these systems to take the evaporation component out of evapotranspiration, take the E out of ET, and the T out of can't, So I think that's the kind of thing that is going to be needed in a very simple way there, but these are opportunities that are yet to be realized, and they may only play a small part of the ultimate set of remedies or solutions, but they may have more part than is currently recognized today.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. Give us a few more. You mentioned no-till. What are some of the other systems that mimic natural systems?
So imagine, if you will, all right, where the region where John and I work, the field station, the university field station, is just a mile away from his home and his office there. Imagine producing crops, and the technologies, the approaches that I'm going to share with you right now, they may not exist right now, but down the road, think about the following. You get a crop established in a field with zero disturbance. All right, that's no-till, zero-tillage technology. It could be putting a transplant in the ground. It could be putting a seed in the ground with the equipment that would be required. You then have the residues, the crop residues that haven't been harvested from the previous series of crops that you've harvested in your farm field, that are there covering the soil, that are adding organic matter to the soil, that are feeding the soil biology, adding greater porosity, water holding capacity of the soil, air porosity, those kind of general soil functional benefits that might come out of that kind of a thing. And you've reduced soil water evaporation from the soil, you've cooled the soil, you may also have enriched the environment, the crop micro canopy environment with more carbon dioxide that's coming from the respiration from those kind of things that may be a trade-off, it may be a balance in that regard. But those would be the reduced disturbance kinds of systems I'm talking about, Craig. And they're not going to work for everything. This is going to take lots of development, lots of learning there. But it's possible.
So it really is agroecology that Steve Gleesman and UC Santa Cruz and others have been embracing for quite some time. Yeah. Now, you touched upon the S word, which relates to the R word, storage to reservoirs. You voted, and I did too, for Prop 1, 65% of us in November. Did you read the small print? $2.7 billion is going to storage. Now, my question for our panel is, what does that mean? And then I want to hear from you what it means. I'm going to give you a little litmus as to what it means to me. Storage means water banking. That is a no-brainer. In times when we have plenty, we need to bank it in our soil. We can do that and then pull it up from our aquifers, but it also means reservoirs. And I think when I say the R word, you're going to think of damming up a river, a watershed, and creating a reservoir. I want to hear what you guys think of that. Where do you think that $2.7 billion should go? Where will it go? Give me some specifics.
Want me to start?
Yes, please.
I don't know where it will go, because that's a very political question, and it's going to be is it not? Is that an understatement?
Understatement.
Yeah. Where I wish it would go is, rather than into large-scale reservoirs, I would love to see a distributed network of locally controlled small ponds. Really, essentially, like just dotting the landscape everywhere where there's a natural place, where the land tells us there's a natural opportunity for ponds.
Kind of mimicking, as you brought up, Jeff.
Yeah, kind of like probably what used to exist. And I sometimes think about this as analogous to what I also wish were going to happen in the solar or renewable energy arena, where instead of, we may need some large scale utility scale mega solar farms, just like we already have some large dams. But I would posit that we shouldn't build many more of those until we've exhausted the infrastructure we already have in place, the rooftops, the parking lots, the highway medians, the stuff that we're already have a heavy human footprint on, and not build on the deserts or on the farms that are going fallow. Now, that's a tricky business, I know, because there's some land use. Yeah, I know, but I know that there's some farmers going out of business because they don't have water, so they want to get some money back, so they'll turn their land into solar, and I get that economic reality, but we can use policy tools to discourage that and encourage other uses, and I'd love to see similarly. Distributed networks of water. And the other thing I wanted to say about the Prop 1 is, importantly, there's also 100 $1 million in that water bond for on-farm and urban water use efficiency, and that's a first. That hasn't, as far as we know, happened before. It's something we and the Community Alliance with Family Farmers really pushed, and I think we were the main champions to get that in there to help address this potential for soil building and on-farm irrigation efficiency and stuff like that. So it's another important component of that water bond.
John, what are your thoughts on storage and?
I'll take and start at where you ended up, and we'll get to the other side. But I think our planning codes, right? You got people doing planning codes every day. And there's certain things that are really easy. There was a program down in Riverside, worked really good. It was where they put solar panels on houses for people that didn't have enough money for houses, putting solar on, right? So they were socioeconomically adverse. Okay, they put it in a lien on the mortgage on the property and the property taxes, and it took them a long time, man, to fight the bureaucracy down at the recorder's office is the fact that they could actually get some money out of it, but the bankers were worried about there being a lien on the property in front of the mortgage. Okay, let's fix this thing. We have control of the law system here, so we can get this worked out so everybody's happy. At the end of the day, the people got solar. They reduced their power bills, because one of the things is keeping the house warm in the wintertime. They need electricity. And so it's like, okay, well, this is kind of cool. And so at the end of the day, the state gets the money back over a long period of time, low interest loan. Everybody can share in it. Not a bad deal. You could do it in Berkeley, you could do it in Five Points, you can do it in Riverside, wherever you want to go. The other side of that, in the water issue, $100 million, right? Let's put a loan program together. We have a program from the California Water Control Board that gives out money from Proposition 20 to all the water districts for water conservation programs. So like John Diener wants to put drip irrigation on his land, he can go out and borrow money and in 5 years pay it back. We pay the interest rate, whatever the state's interest rate is, as we pay it back, and it's a revolving fund, so it's self-perpetuating. Crazy as it sounds, why don't we have a cistern or a rain barrel or something like that incorporated into our building codes, right? We've got all these houses being built. Don't look back, look forward. Where are we going in California? What is it that we can use? Yeah, the rain barrel might last a month or two, but you know what? That's a month or two of low saline water that's pure that people can use locally, and it cuts down on the flood. How do you create flood control? Flood control first starts with incremental breaking of the water's aggregation. So as it goes down the hill, you get more and more of it, and pretty soon you got a flood. If you can step back and break that, right? The problem with cities is, in the urban situation, is you have hard services, right? So what is it that you can keep the big preponderance of water aggregating to become something that's very unmanageable? You can do it with the cistern. That's pretty simple, easy, low-tech stuff that we can do in a heartbeat, right? Anyway, enough said on that. I think there's some easy fixes within the system on some existing dams that can increase the water storage to a certain amount, okay? Again, that's a political issue that has to be fettered out in the system. The reality is, though, our largest resource that's untapped is groundwater restoring. And that is done. And I think there's a program to be had in the state where you take the canal structures and you increase their capacity, because when you have these rain events and you do have floods coming down out of watersheds, they've got to be diverted within a system. There's always going to be enough water flushing out to the ocean through the system, but ultimately you've got to be able to put groundwater basins. My contention with people, I've told Jeff and others, that you need to buy an easement from a dairy or somebody that is growing annual crops on particular land, built a dike around it on these geologically appropriate areas, and allow it to be flooded during that period of time that you have water. When you don't have water, then let the person grow their crop on that particular parcel.
Even vineyards and orchards can
same
withstand
idea.
a certain
and
amount of
you
that.
need to be able to do some land forming. In other words, you have to put some borders around it. In France, in order to kill phylloxera grapes, they actually will border up around the vines in the wintertime when they're dormant and actually flood them, because you can kill vines during the active growing season, but when they're dormant, you can actually flood them and not hurt them. And so that's another way of coming to that part. So there's a lot of integration that can be done within the system.
Right.
In the case that Jeff was talking about, if you think about your yard, you go around and put mulch around the trees. Well, it does. It holds the moisture. You can pick it up. It's usually damp there, and the roots are happy. They get air exchange, all that kind of stuff. So having the composting or the material left behind from the previous crop breaks the rain when it hits, and so you have a better porosity for the soil and the water, ability to go in the soil, and has the ability to absorb it faster, and so the runoff from those systems are a lot less. That's what's happened and been shown multiple times. There's a soil lab at University of Ames, Iowa, right? And anyway, they've done all that work to tell us.
I'm going to ask him the...
So anyway, that's John Diener's Solve the
word.
World. Yeah.
No, what I was imagining was storage in the groundwater, recharge of the groundwater. And if you're interested, I brought a sheet of references that I forgot to bring up here or put on the table, but I have them here. There's a very interesting article. Jay Lund is with the UC Davis Watershed Sciences Center at UC Davis, and they have a water blog talking about the pros and cons of different kinds of storage and the costs of different kinds of storage, comparing surface storage or reservoirs versus groundwater storage that John just ended up with there. And there's some very innovative things that are going on right now, looking at on those high rainfall years that have happened and hopefully will happen, that can you find strategically useful soil types that will allow water to be recharging the groundwater. So I think that's going to be a kind of storage, increased capacity of storage that could be important there. John's comment about the difference between the Colorado watershed and the Colorado River watershed and the storage capacity we have in California, it's a strikingly different capacity that watershed has, much higher than in California. But these are all the kinds of things that are going to be sorted out. But the groundwater is something that hasn't been widely explored, I think, yet.
So I want to take your questions, but I have one more for the panel. You touched upon planning codes, which gets into regulations. I was at a discussion last week where one of our friends from NRDC said, well, isn't it time to raise the issue of restricting, in essence, I'm not sure I'm phrasing his question quite properly, but putting permits, restricting the development of agricultural lands in unsustainable watersheds. As a farmer, as farmers, that tends to bristle us a bit. But are we there yet? Are we? What do you think, esteemed panelist?
I'll just say that at CalCAN we think that we're not ready for that. That we haven't exhausted the possibilities. That there's actually we haven't even given incentives a chance. I don't think. I would argue in terms of we've got the Farm Bill programs and they incentivize voluntary actions to improve on-farm conservation practices, and they are very popular and very successful across the country. And in California, we have an opportunity right in front of us. This is we've got Prop 1 money. That's incentive money right there to do the kinds of water storage, whether it's above ground or below ground, and we should let that play out. And then we've got cap and trade money, which is, I predict this year going to, for the first time, deliver some meaningful millions of dollars to agriculture to encourage the kinds of farming practices that will not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions on farms, but sequester carbon and ultimately help those growers be more resilient and more adaptable to climate change. And once that starts to happen, once that economic engine starts to turn and growers see that they can actually be rewarded for doing those kind of practices, and that they'll start to see all the benefits of doing those kind of practices, I think that will start to create its own momentum. It might take a few years, but we will be in court arguing for decades if we try, to regulate where crops are grown. And in the meantime, maybe that'll happen, whatever. I don't put a lot of stock in that delivering any near-term solutions. That will take literally decades to litigate.
John, any quick thoughts on that?
Well, American Farmland Trust, what did they say the other day? How many acres were converted in California last year for ag to urban? Wasn't it like 50,000 acres?
50,000,
On average, yeah. For years, it's decades been like that.
Just to let everybody know, there hasn't been any new farmland brought into production over the last probably 50 years, right? I mean, that since 1970, there has not been any expansion on land for new cropland. There's been probably over 2 million acres of non-crop land that were like the hills and stuff that were all dry, that were planted to cities, which takes 2.5 acre feet of water. So there's been over probably 10 to 15 million acre feet of expropriated water from someplace, wherever, to take care of those cities as they've expanded in our population expansion. So that would fly in the face of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Jeff, any thoughts?
I'm just thinking here. Yeah, I would agree with Renata that would be a severe kind of a step to take. I was on a part of a panel discussing at Renata's CalCAN event a couple weeks ago, and there were a couple of panelists from the Pajaro watershed, the region over by Watsonville. And what they were describing is a public, a stakeholder set of 3 statements of commitment that the public came up with in that watershed. They're up against not necessarily water shortages, but saltwater intrusion from the ocean there. So it's going to be a very serious constraint to farming in that region. The first statement of commitment that this public stakeholder group came up with, and maybe this is, I'm speaking for myself right now, I guess here, but was that we value farming in this region, in this watershed. And that the second and third then went from that broad recognition of the value and the benefit to the public of that activity, to what they were going to do or what they wouldn't be able to do as a result of that. So I don't know if that broad scale public investment or valuing of the innovation, which has been tremendous in many respects there. The kinds of things that John has described and very briefly about the innovation that they've developed to manage water at their farm, to manage water of different qualities over the last 30 years, is nothing short of just phenomenal. And that's maybe what you're getting at, Renata, about, this is going to be needed, and maybe incentives will be part of that. I don't know that, but I guess, what is it hard to imagine a public policy that supports this in a better way? I don't know.
Well, we really are excited to have your questions, and yes. Would you just tell us where you're from?
My name is Nathaniel. I write for Grist.
Great.
We have microphones.
How much headroom do we have with water efficiency? How much room do we have to expand with drip irrigation or more efficient forms of irrigation? Is everybody already doing that, or in California?
That's a good question, Nathaniel. And it's a one that is very contentious, as you might well imagine as well. And there are pros and cons about a lot of what I'm about to say here. But California, the irrigation systems in California, according to the National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS, California has somewhere between 40 and 50% surface irrigation systems. All right, so that's gravity flow, water moving over the soil surface there, which in general terms is not as efficient and uniform in application efficiency of getting water across a field or an orchard or a vineyard according to what crop needs are. So that's an area where efficiencies could be improved. All right, looking at this, would you agree with that, John?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, okay. So that's one area there. But there are trade-offs that are associated with that, because you've got to manage salts as well. One of the things about surface irrigation is that it manages salinity. It leaches salts down, and it applies what John uses as a leaching fraction. And if you don't do that, then you're at risk for salinizing the shallow root zone soils. So there are trade-offs there, but certainly surface irrigation and improving the efficiency of some of those systems could be looked at.
John.
And that's a complicated question that the general public in California can't even fathom. And I'm not trying to demean it, but it's the Hetch Hetchy water for San Francisco as kind of the epitome of why people still flood irrigate. You know what that means? It means that they have old water rights that they don't pay anything for, and they can flood the water on the ground because they can. And the issue is a political issue that the state legislature has to answer. In our region, we're 100% drip irrigation. We actually have an ordinance, because we're a judicial body as a water district, that it's not allowed to have furrow or flood irrigation anymore. And so there are areas with old water rights, like off the Colorado, like in Imperial. It's flood irrigated. The reason is, and it isn't until people see the value of the production that comes from doing drip irrigation, that then it's an economic decision as why they put it on, not because of the cost of water. So the answer is not to generalize that all agriculture is very inefficient and floods everything. They don't. But those that don't have to worry about that then are rather callous about their elitist role in life, right?
So the other part of this too is that it's not water that's necessarily lost that goes down through the root zone, and it's captured in the hydrologic cycle of the region, even with surface irrigation.
In certain places.
That's, yeah.
Not in all places.
Another question in the back.
Hi, thanks a lot. My name is Susan Niesing. I'm coming from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, where I work mainly on climate-smart agriculture. And it's very interesting to hear a lot of what is happening here. If I see in the Netherlands, it's really, if you want to get climate-smart agriculture on the map, you really have to work on integrated approaches, getting really a lot of different stakeholders together. I see your point on the public involvement is very important, but I haven't heard anything from the rest of the value chain. How important, what do you see as a role for the rest of the value chain for the suppliers and until the supermarkets, because it's also very important to get those on board. So I'd be happy to hear what your stake on that is. Thanks.
Good. Great question. John, you're thinking, and when you're thinking, a good response is brewing, I can tell.
I put an article out on the counter out there. You need to pick it up. And that's what the markets in the United States do compared to the ones in Europe. And that has to do with conditions of how they approach the marketplace in the United States. And in that case, they're going to Mexico to get the product to bring up here because they can buy it cheaper there. I'll leave it at that. You want to read those articles from LA Times, folks.
Other responses. I think that you're much farther ahead of us in Netherlands. I think we've got a lot to learn from you. Any other thoughts on responding to that question? Renata?
Nothing very helpful. I don't put a lot of stake in the consumer decisions in this country, honestly. So I don't think that's where the driver is for change. I think it's with the growers and the leaders like these guys. And they'll make different decisions if the economics pencil out better for them, and that'll help drive the market.
But another thing that John hasn't talked about too, that it sort of relates to your question, is you and your teams of colleagues are working on life cycle analysis of the whole production system, and that information is going to generate value to these diverse stakeholders you might be talking about there. So, I mean, it is part of what you're doing.
Well, and the other side of that is that we, as active participants in the AB 32 process in California, which is the life cycle analysis for the carbon footprint, is the fact that we are working all that through because the people that buy produce from us want to have a sustainability factor to be able to talk to their people about. And so we are engaged with those people. And we're working in the biofuel arena also, which is a whole separate deal. But it is all about that life cycle analysis.
We have a question right here, yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Marcia Ichi-Eiterman with Pesticide Action Network here in Oakland, Thank you so much. This is a really fascinating panel discussion. I really appreciate all that you've been sharing. I was reflecting back on Craig's original framing and talking about the interconnectedness, all the different dimensions of the agroecosystem. And I had a particular question actually for both John and Jeff probably. The benefits of no-till are very clear, as you've been describing, in terms of the successes you've had with water management and the soil management benefits as well. My question is, what has your experience been with the weed management part of that? Because as we often know, no-till can go either direction. We can have extremely herbicide-dependent, Roundup-based no-till systems in the US and Brazil and elsewhere. And there also are organic approaches to conservation tillage or low-till. Some of the work out of Rodale uses living mulches and then crimper rollers and so on. And I was wondering, on a practical level for you, John, in your farming experiences, how has that worked out? Do you find that to be a trade-off and a challenge? Are you running up against problems in the no-till systems, or have you been finding some interesting successes with less herbicide-reliant approaches? So I'd love to hear about that. And then I guess from Jeff's side, I'm just very interested in the state of the research you've been doing in terms of what are those additional kind of interactive effects through the agroecosystem of low-till or no-till in terms of other soil, plant, insect, pest, predator relationships, if you've happened to look into that.
Great.
Thank
Good
you.
question.
Yep.
Try.
Sure.
Go ahead.
You know what the biggest problem with no-till is in our world? The rodents. Think about this. Where is it practiced most? It's practiced most in the Midwest, okay? Guess what happens there? It freezes in the wintertime, folks. And it not only freezes in the top, it freezes in the ground. Hey, that's pretty cool. In California, it's happy days. Now you have cover, right? And you have food resources, and everybody's happy,
It's true.
We're the best thing that ever happened to a Swenson hawk. I want to tell you, man, when Pivot's sit there and the Swenson hawk's sitting up there and he's just having a heyday out there eating gophers and mice and things. And so our biggest problem with the no-till system, and quite honestly why we actually have to till the soil at times to break that cycle, is just to get rid of the rodent population, because we can't keep up with it all. And the baits and things that you would use for rodents will affect the food chain that they're part of, right? Yeah. And so now you put the Cooperative or whatever it's called, and it ends up in the coyotes or hawks or whoever, and away we go. So anyway, all that being said is our biggest problem. The herbicide issue, I've grown organic corn and all these other things, quite a number of different crops, and we have done it without the use of chemicals. Is it easier to use the chemicals from a farmer's perspective?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Is it achievable with proper manipulation and things when you do that? A lot of times if you're doing organic farming in our system, you end up having to do some tillage to go with it, but then you don't use the chemicals. So there's some gives and takes in the whole deal.
Your question, you have lots of knowledge about some of the things that are going on around the country, and you're right, there's a lot of innovation in organic, no-till kinds of systems there. I think it gets back to the whole systems idea of this thing. There are very, very productive systems that are not organic, that have very minimal, very modest herbicide inputs, that are taking advantage of the rotation strategies and sequences of crops that they grow in. They might put in 2 monocot crops, grass crops, and then followed by broadleafs, and try to diversify the cropping system above ground. And then they use different strategic interventions, chemical interventions or whatever, in no-till systems. So they can be, and they are very outstanding examples of successful, sustainable conservation ag systems like that. There are also places where herbicide resistance raises its head and things fall apart, and they aren't being successful there. So I think there's the potential for management to address those kind of things there. I don't want to give the impression that this is currently happening right now here in the context. The dairy silage sector, for instance, in California, back in 2004, there was less than 2% of the dairy silage production, corn and wheat kind of acreage that feeds cows there under these kind of practices now. It's gone up in about 8 years to about 38%. So there's a lot of action happening right now in this thing. But the experience base, how to do all of this, is still embryonic here. But it's a great potential, I think.
We have a question right here in front and then back here. And just tell us who you are again.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Kuhneman. I'm retired from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. Mm-hmm. I'm proud to say that I'm a friend and a partner in crime with Jeff Mitchell here.
That's good.
One of the things when one is in an academic community like this, there's a great aversion to talk about the big elephant that's not in this room, and that's the private sector. And I'd sort of like to know from the two farmers that are here, if you see that the private sector, the dealers, the input, the output, the marketing people, that whole group could be a greater partner in this whole process of getting resources to train trainers, to do the right sorts of things for better farm management. And how do we pull those key people together to be partners in this so that they're not excluded and just considered sort of enemies of the right kinds of agriculture practices? Thank you.
John, you want to give it a shot?
In relationship to the water?
With relationship to good agricultural practices in general, like conservation agriculture, but also related to water, because all of these things improve water use efficiency. So for them to support the kind of work and the training that goes on for better agriculture practices to address water use efficiency issues.
In another state university, Fresno, we have a very developed water center there, okay? And that water center is all about bringing industry at all levels, manufacturers, retail, distribution, to the party, and have the ability to work on, first, efficiency. How do you apply water efficiently in whatever method you decide to do in that world, okay? So in the California Water Institute at Fresno State, you can go there as a grower. We are integrated with those people to a fair amount. Jeff's been interacting with those people. And they're doing some work at the field station also. But in how to best apply water for a particular crop, because of the diversity that we have in California, any one manufactured or devised equipment thing. And then with that is the training of the individual or the technical people that need to go with that out in the field. And so they do trainings for the farms. They produce students that may go to work for farmers or for the irrigation world, okay? And I can't tell you how much progress has been made over the last 15 years in what I would call the robust quality of the material coming from that world in response to things like coyotes eating the drip tubing. Hey, all right, let's go fix a leak out in the field, you know? I mean, all these real practical, down-to-earth things, but they've tried to address those things, right? So far as to how to work on regulating valves and things of that nature. They're all about the technology of the internet, right? Everybody wants to have the cell connection to do that. The thing we need to work on, when I went to school in 1970, they were using gypsum blocks to measure the water in the soil. You know what, today? We're still using them. Everybody's got a $1 billion deal above the dirt, and below the dirt, the technology is as old as the hills. It hasn't moved an inch. If there's anything we need, is a reliable, neutron probe. Good old Jeff, man. You see him out there lugging his neutron probe around, going and zapping all the pipes. Anyway, they're a pain in the rear besides being radiation. But anyway, the reality is we need to have a system where we can measure the water in the soil appropriately and track it over time electronically. And we can do that with the gypsum blocks, but no one's come up with a more robust and simpler to use deal. Tensiometers are just great, but then the water's got to be right. And the technology below the soil is a real pain. But you use it because that's what you have, and that's where we need some help from the university and all these smart guys that we got here,
John, I think that's a perfect response to that. That's where private sector really comes in. There's a question right here.
Hi, my name is Madhyama, and I'm a graduate student at UC Berkeley. And in fact, I am studying the California drought for my master's thesis, so that's why I'm here. I had two questions. So, in fact, I'm focusing on Fresno, and in the Westlands Water District, what I've heard is, everybody is using drip irrigation, so conservation as far as irrigation goes is great. And it seems like there are some growers who are going to the next level of using conservation agriculture techniques. They have been doing it, or it's intensifying now. My question is, what do you think it'll take to really become a more popular practice across the sector? Or do you think it's already happening, it's just not talked about much? That's one. And the second question is to do with the groundwater legislation in your regions. What's the movement on that in your regions? Thank you.
In Westlands, we've had groundwater monitoring for over 30 years. We have a great chart of the groundwater in relationship to our surface water allotments and the ebb and the flow of it. Actually, before the water started to be imported into the property, into the district, we have where it was started. We have all the USGS backgrounds. They measure the wells twice a year in our area. We're all metered on our water meters and all that. And there's, like I say, part of the ordinance of having to not use any surface water application, but only drip and like over here, like mechanical irrigation, was done in the effort to manage that groundwater recharge that we do have. And then actually in the last couple of years, while the water table has gone down, we've also seen in areas where it actually has come back up. And so we have a good knowledge within Westlands of the dynamics of the geology, as well as the amount of water that we need. And we actually have imported quite a bit of water from the open market to supplement the groundwater, because people know that we have to have a certain amount of that. And the best thing in California we can do is have a more transparent water marketing program that ebbs and flows within that system. But that's in particular the Westlands situation. And the other question was?
What do you think it will take to get conservation agriculture practices?
Oh, the conservation agriculture. I would say a majority of the permanent crops in our area are non-tillage. All of mine are. I know my neighbors are pretty much all there on that. We do use some Roundup to manipulate the cover crop or whatever that's growing in the wintertime, take care of winter weeds, but basically we do non-tillage. And the almonds, the grapes, all the permanent crops. In the row crop arena, a lot of it has to do with the size of the seed. And Jeff's doing work at the field station, working on the placement of the vegetable seeds in relationship to that. The other issue is in the lettuce and the finer vegetables is the E. coli and salmonella issue. And when you have a lot of material on the soil surface, you run into food safety issues. And in the leafy green agreement, you have to actually work the soil and do that. And that was come up with a lot of work with the USDA as well as the university. Jeff?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. First of all, the irrigation management improvement. There has been a tremendous learning curve in adoption of improved technologies. John mentioned using CIMIS, irrigation, weather station data, that kind of stuff, using improved technologies. That's been increasing dramatically, I think. The conservation ag, the whole systems integration and imagining transformation of those kind of systems, that's going to be another maybe next generation kind of a challenge here. How might that be accelerated, if you will? I think farmer networks, farmers sharing information about learning about techniques to do these kind of things, that's been very successful in a lot of other states. We don't currently have that kind of an existing formalized network of information sharing farmer to farmer, but we're trying to work on that. That's one of the big goals that we have working with people like John here. People are interested in these kind of techniques, but they're not sure how to get started on them. They don't have familiarity with the equipment necessarily, and it's going to be a learning curve. So that scaling up that Eric mentioned earlier and involving all the different parties to the table is what we're trying to work in a small way anyway.
Great question. We have a question in the back and a couple coming up in front.
Hi, I'm going to be the annoying person that's just going to make a quick statement, but I have a reason here. My name's Hillary Phillips. I work for the USDA, or the NRCS Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Ann asked that a representative from this agency attend today, so that's my piece. And I just want to thank you all for this great conversation. I had nothing to add, which is, means either I'm kind of stupid or, you're all really smart, which is great. But I think, I do work in the trenches, so to speak. I work mainly under the Farm Bill, which is a cost share incentive program. Renata spoke about it real briefly. And to incentivize farmers to work with conservation agricultural practices. A lot of what we do is converting farms that go from furrow irrigation to drip. There is a NRCS office in every county across the state across the nation, except for San Francisco. And so I just work in Contra Costa County itself. And my biggest thing that I see is implementation. Everything what you speak is, the truth. It's just getting the buy-in. And for me, it's, what are the drivers? And it's either going to be an economic driver or a regulatory driver. And so I work with local agencies and looking at ways that we can incentivize those drivers and that economic driver itself as, you have to be really crafty with this business. But it's an exciting time to be a part of it, and my agency started from the Dust Bowl, and it's still there, and it's still strong.
I know John wants to respond, but I want to say many thanks. I don't believe John and I could do what we do without the NRCS. You guys help us, you lead us, you help us get matching grants, you actually help us as farmers. It's hard to do all of the paperwork, and your team is there on the ground. John?
Yeah, and also in the fact that in our drainage issues, it was the NRCS that were the right agency to help utilize the right techniques and go through the discovery and engineering that it took to get that done. In response to what you said, and early in the program of drip irrigation, we had people making like 2 to 3 times the yield with bell peppers. Well, if you grow tomatoes, you don't want to grow bell peppers because the disease situation on the bell peppers usually rolls over into the tomatoes and vice versa. So those guys are over here, tomato guys are over here, and so I'm one of the tomato guys. So anyway, the other thing is onions. So what has happened, if you look at the California Statistics Service and you look at the average yield of tomatoes in California for production tomatoes for processing, and the thing has just gone like that, you have people in high water right holding areas that the water doesn't cost anything. And they're installing drip irrigation, not because they're trying to conserve water, but because of the amount of yield that has been achieved and the quality of the tomatoes in relationship to that. So 2 things have happened. One, the University of California has a relationship with the tomato industry to where they bring the genetics forward those tomatoes get distributed, those genetics get distributed to the industry that then creates the seeds or the plants that we plant as farmers, okay? So there's assessments that go back and forth. So there's a land grant college thing going on here, guys. And so anyway, that happens, but that genetic improvement as well as cultural improvement through the drip irrigation methodology has used less nitrogen, higher production, greater yields, making the California industry the most competitive industry. We're just now having some issues with the value of the dollar in relationship to the tomato paste in the world. It's happened in onions for the fresh market. It's happened in the bell peppers. It's happened in cotton. It's happened in all the crops. Generally, people learn the technology. Like Jeff said, it may take another generation because this generation today is doing the drip irrigation. The next one is going to have to come along and do that. It's a slow process because people have to see and feel comfortable because a train wreck is really not acceptable in agriculture because of the dollars involved.
Great. Maria, and then I want to have a question over here.
Maria Chaveste, Berkeley Food Institute. My question, I was really struck by the statement that need for a network on sharing information among farmers, which kind of surprised me. But then it led me to think about, well, we hear a lot about sort of big industrial farms and sort of the corporate interests that dictate policies. I would have thought that if there were better ways of doing things, that sort of concentration would facilitate moving things faster. So I'm just really curious, why is there a need for deeper, stronger networks of sharing information, and how does that relate to sort of the financial and economic structures in, let's say, the Central Valley?
Since I'm the one that said it, I'll handle it here. But no, there's lots of great information sharing going on, all right? We're part of that here. The universities are, the private sector is involved with that. So that's a great thing that's in place already. What I'm imagining here is some of these new systems, challenges, and how to improve systems even further, the next generation of improvements. That's unknown right now. We don't have the familiarity with that. There are a number of very successful models for information sharing that I don't, in my own experience, we don't have in California. And they have been developed, for instance, in Nebraska. Nebraska is the state, there's more irrigation that goes on in Nebraska than any other state, than California actually, all right? They have what's called the Nebraska Agricultural Water Management Network. It's a system of 1,200 farmers throughout the entire state that are not only using advanced technologies, but they're sharing information like that, all right? We don't have that. I'm not saying that we don't have other good things that are involved underway right now. Renata talked about the soil health thing. This is not one of these, instantaneous kinds of technology inserts that's going to see improvement. It's a long-term, it's a system of transformation. We don't have the capability of the knowledge sharing to get at that kind of thing. Indiana has what's called the Indiana Conservation Cropping Systems Initiative. It's with people, lots of NRCS people. They have over 600 demonstration sites where people who are receptive to learning and becoming more familiar with new strategies, new technologies, they're doing this kind of thing. I think it's a great model that we're very keen on. In fact, again, I applaud the NRCS as well. They're big partners in our efforts to try to get these networks underway here. So that's the scaling up that we're trying to accomplish. It's not to say that there isn't good work going on right now, because there certainly is, and a lot of information development and research, extension, education capacities. But this is another kind of thing that we don't have right now, I don't think.
Great question, Maria. I think we'll take our last question, or second to last question. Getting close to the break.
Hi, I'm Leah Atwood, and I'm here with MESA, the Multinational Exchange for Sustainable Agriculture. I also have a beginning farm and eco-village starting in El Sobrante called Wild and Radish. Super excited to hear you talking about farmer networks. and actually, and grateful to BFI to making this open to the public. Actually, here there's 9 beginning farmers and students and educators from 7 different countries here with me, from Haiti and Peru and Korea and Taiwan and Grenada. Did I miss anyone? And Ecuador.
Great.
And to build on your comment, Jeff, and also on Maria's, I think that the scaling of farmer networks is happening. You mentioned farmer-to-farmer exchange, which started in Latin America. And I think there's some really awesome organizations like Farmers Guild and The Grange that's been around forever, and Farm Link that are connecting farmers all over to intergenerationally so that farmers are teaching other farmers. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. And then I wanted to ask you all about what you think from a climate change resiliency standpoint with crop diversification, specifically around organic plant breeding and seed saving, and what you think about developing new varieties that are locally habituated or land races, and what can be done to scale that up, what you think is working and what's not working, and how to support that further.
Great question, and thank you all for being here. What you're doing is so important. Our U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, has said we need 100,000 new farmers, and then we need them now. So we need what you're doing. Renata, you wanted to respond?
Well, kind of weaving together a few things I've been wanting to say in this last little bit. I think Jeff's right. We do need a more, and you are too, Leah, a more robust network of farmer communications. Apparently, that's one of the places farmers get the most of their information is from each other. That's kind of how we all work, really. People we trust and know. But I don't think that's the only thing. I think we also need some more technical assistance so that they're, like what Jeff's doing is really a prime example of this. Our extension, co-op extension, has been greatly underfunded. It was, it's been declining until recently for decades, and so we've got to build that back up. We've got a great network of NRCS offices and RCDs that partner with them to deliver those services. We've got some nonprofits that could use some more resources. So we've got to shore all that technical assistance back up so that growers know what are the best practices to use or the best systems to put in place for climate purposes and other sustainability issues. And then we, like I keep saying, need some financial incentives to underwrite the risks associated with transitioning to different practices. There's risks. You can suffer yield losses. You might incur expenses from having to get new equipment. You might have to train yourself up. You're taking a risk whenever you change from one thing to another. We can't rely on John Dieners everywhere around the state because not everybody's willing to do the crazy stuff he does on his farm every day. So that package of things is what's really important, and what we're after are some of those cap and trade dollars through a bill. I just want to put the number in your head, SB 367. I think it will make a difference this year in actually pulling some of that cap and trade money and directing it towards a competitive grants program that funds demonstration projects. I hope that this CASI project is a recipient of some funding eventually, because what they lack is money to keep their work going. They don't lack a network. They've got that 2,000 growers now, and they've got all this knowledge and they've cracked all these codes around how to do this stuff, but they suffer from a deficit of funding. So if we can get more money pumped into those innovative hubs that are all over the state, then we'll start to see I think a more robust mycelial connection between all these innovators that will then just permeate the industry.
That was a great last question. We'll take yours over break. And wonderful response. What a joy it is to be here with you and to have a great conversation. I know we'll be here and would love to continue the dialogue for the next panel coming up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. That was a fascinating discussion. I know we could keep going, and thank you, Craig, so much for doing an excellent moderation. I do want to say, since I have a moment on the podium, having worked in farming before this work here at Berkeley Food Institute, I also had the privilege of working with many farmers who were innovators, very much so, and forming farmer networks. So that was part of my role, is actually facilitating a lot of exchange among farmers. So it is happening, I think, a lot, especially commodity group specific, but you see more and more integrated farming, like through the Ecological Farming Organization, Ecological Farming Association, excuse me. And anyway, I just think that there's a lot of optimism to have this kind of sharing, but yeah, just wanted to share that as well. But my experience also is that you can do no-till with integrated systems, organic systems, by introducing animals when you're in orchards. So that's a great way we did that in vineyards and in orchards. That's happening too. So anyway, on that, I just want to thank you all for coming, and please stay through the break. We're going to have an excellent session following that deals much more with the social dimensions. And I know all of our speakers here also care very much about the social side. The focus was more on farming practices, but fostering diversity and health and resilience in our farming systems also requires dealing with the people, the absolute fundamental human resources that are at the core of our farming sector as well. So after the break, we'll have our panelists join us for that. So we're going to reconvene in about 15 minutes. I do want to also encourage you to look at the handouts, and thank you to Hillary for bringing NRCS information, and there's also some other literature out in the hallway, and help yourselves to coffee. And also thank you to Rosalie for all her work. So thank you.